you use the very thing that you're trying to overcome its effects. But we knew that it was always going to be a problem, always going to end in failure.
What has been the impact of the ideal of transformation or transformationism as understood by the current ruling party in South Africa, the African National Congress? What can we learn from maybe some of the language they use, how that factors into policies, and what has been the general impact on the average South African? Joining me to unpack is Michael Morris. Michael is head of media at the South African Institute of Race Relations. Michael, thanks so much for your time with us this week. Just to start off with, we're focusing on a piece of yours recently published at Business Day, which we'll link to in the description below, one of your weekly columns, in which you focus on the ANC imposing its idea of transformation on us as South Africans, and maybe why the rhetoric doesn't meet the implementation, as it were, or how the implementation of negative consequences departs from the rhetoric of these lofty, noble ideals. Just to start us off with your view on how the ANC views its role in transforming South Africa. What's that sort of animating force?
I think, one of the great disappointments, I guess, of the 1990s was that, this was South Africa's opportunity to really redeem itself, to demonstrate, a kind of truly humanist solution to a very long history of atrocity, of abuse, and so on. And it was really our moment to show that we could actually overcome these things. We could be truly non-racial, as the promise then was, and that people could actually come together across all these communities and restore the country to a path of fairness, prosperity, and so on, stability, which had long been denied us by the history of using race and abusing race. And the great disappointment came, I think, when in the late 90s to begin with, and it strengthened thereafter, the ANC turned to race as an instrument to transform, so-called. And I think liberals were always hugely suspicious of this. The argument was bought by most of society. It seemed almost sensible thing to do. You use the very thing that you're trying to overcome its effects. But we knew that it was always going to be a problem, always going to end in failure, always going to re-racialize a debate that needed to be far more focused on practical things, how people lived, and the economy and so on. And so what you had was the strengthening, an increasingly desperate effort by the ANC to use race to transform, and because of its failures, that effort became more and more intense. And I referred a few moments ago to how people live. I think, if you're going to look at transforming a society, you've got to fundamentally look at how people actually live. And this is one of the remarkable things about the Quality of Life Index that is really the subject of my column, crafted by your colleagues at the Center for Risk Analysis. I think beginning in 2017 was the first one. And it's essentially an index of 10 weighted indicators covering matric pass rate, unemployment, monthly spending of 10,000 Rand or more, whether you home ownership, whether you have a house and whether it's owned or paid off, whether you have a bond in the sense, and that is an indicator whether you've got the income to afford a bond and to be able to pay it, and access to various kinds of services. So it's a basket of things, which, as I put it in the piece, if you score in them well, means that you're living a reasonably stable, secure, middle-class life with the potential of rising prosperity and the optimism of knowing it. So that's really the package of what you want in a transforming society. People who are living better and know it and have a sense that it's really worth doing all the things they're doing, paying taxes, going to work, sending their kids to school, making sure their homework's done, putting out the rubbish, because you have this, you feel that you belong in the society, and there is a prospect of improvement. So perhaps I'll leave it there. We'll talk about what the index shows, but that really is looking at how we really live, as opposed to how the ANC imagined that we ought to live.
So, Michael, drilling down a little bit into then that index, how have the trends changed then over time as you've had this pervasive, overall, if one talks about macroeconomics, you want to talk about sort of the macro ideas. So in this case, the macro ideology of the National Democratic Revolution and transforming South Africa, with the ANC as the vanguard of the revolution. How has the average South African's quality of life been impacted? Can one break it down to, by province, for example?
Indeed, indeed. So there, there are a couple of quite stark reflections of the reality, the state of the nation, so to speak, um, evident in the scores. Just a word about that. Each of these 10 weighted indicators is scored from 0 to 10. 10 obviously being the preferable end of the scale. And what we see, for instance, is if you look at the two leading provinces, if they're breaking it down by province, the two are the two most economically vibrant and dynamic parts of the country. It's the Western Cape, which in 2018 scored the highest at 6.5, followed by Gauteng at 6.4. So the two key provinces economically. No surprises there that they should be the ones to score high. And this is obviously, these also, this gives us an indication also of the significance of metropolitan areas and urban areas, because this is where people want to live. This is where the opportunities are. So you get very significant urbanization. And then the poorer provinces, Limpopo and Mpumalanga and so on, and we could go into those scores. But the most striking thing is that the primary beneficiaries of the past 30 years of transformation policy, the intended primary beneficiaries are obviously Black South Africans, and they score lowest of all at 5.3. And the standard of living of white South Africans in 2018 was 7.8. Now, that gives us a picture of essentially 2017, or some years ago. 4 years on, the picture is actually grimmer. The national average has now dropped from 5.7 to 4.7. With the Western Cape still ahead, but with a lower lead, 5.6 as opposed to 6.5, and Gauteng at 5.5, down from 6.4. White South Africans still enjoying the highest standard of living, but down to 7.1, that's from 7.8. And Black South Africans down from 5.3 to 4.5, and still at the lowest level. So we see a crisp picture here of this the fundamental problem that we faced in 1994 was to overcome the effects of our history. We've had 30 years to do it, and these figures reflect an abject failure. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, the biggest, the greatest numbers of youth unemployment, and we are just hopelessly failing to actually tackle these challenges.
And Michael, just a final question: do you see any hints of maybe pragmatism or acknowledging that reality is what it is on the part maybe of the ANC, or do you think we're likely to just concede the continued further divorce, the separation of rhetoric from reality, maybe doubling down on some of these ideas? Or do you think it could change in some ways from that sort of macro side?
It's quite a difficult one to judge in a way, because one of the tragic things about using race, which our 20th century history showed us all too clearly and tragically, is that it can be exploited so easily. It's so readily available to be exploited politically. You define outsiders or the people who are the problem children in society. You define them by race. It's politically saleable. It kind of makes some kind of sense to people if you cunning enough to cast in those terms. So yeah, it is tragically quite a useful stratagem to use race. It also is a way of promising people benefits purely on the basis of who they are. They don't have to do anything other than turn up and approve your political program, and they see themselves as beneficiaries. So there is that side, but I think the other side is that increasingly, as these figures show, um, the hard reality is unignorable. I think in terms of race policy, I doubt that we're likely to see much sensible replacement of that. But we do see with Eskom and with Transnet and various other areas of the economy where the state has played a very significant role, very powerful role, that they're being compelled to begin to think differently about how to find solutions and to turn to certainly turn to the private sector and to organizations that perhaps are not as ideologically riven as their own state departments and state enterprises are. So there's some hope there.
Thank you very much for watching. A reminder, please, before you leave, to like this video if you have not yet done so. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not yet clicked on the big red subscribe button. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.